Jolene Whitfield had been standing at the edge of the equipment bay for almost 2 minutes before she finally said it. She told Owen. Not Owen the mechanic. Not Owen who had spent the last 4 months keeping the HVAC systems in her company's new facility running without a single callback. She told him that her father wanted to meet him, properly, as someone she trusted. Owen Strickland set down the pressure gauge he had been reading. He looked at her for a long moment. Not with warmth, not with the careful professional pleasantness he had maintained through every interaction they had ever had. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been hoping would not arrive. Then he said, very quietly, that he had already met Clifford Whitfield, and that the day they met had cost him the only life he had ever known. He picked up his gauge and walked back into the bay. Jolene stood in the doorway until the sound of the compressor made it clear that the conversation was over. She had not expected that. She had prepared for other versions of this, the polite deflection, the professional caution of a man who knew the gap between their circumstances and was careful about it. She had not prepared for a man who looked at her with perfect steadiness and said that knowing her father had broken something in him that had never fully repaired. There was no anger in it. That was the part that stayed with her on the drive back to her office, that stopped her twice at traffic lights staring at nothing. No rehearsed grievance, no play for sympathy. Just the clean, load-bearing weight of a fact he had carried for a long time, finally put down in a room where she could not ignore it. She had not known. She was certain of that. But certainty did not make it easier to hold. The apartment on Forsyth Street was not large. Owen Strickland had moved there 3 years ago when his daughter started 2nd grade. Specifically, because the elementary school 4 blocks north had a reading program that a woman at his church had told him was the best in the district. He had taken Maeve on the school tour himself on a Wednesday afternoon and watched her stop in front of the classroom library and go still in that particular way she had when something mattered to her. He had signed the lease the following Friday. He ran the mornings the way you run a mechanical system that cannot afford to fail. Up at 5:30. Maeve's lunch packed. She did not like sandwiches pressed together, so he kept the components separate, a thing she had explained to him with great seriousness when she was 5 and which he had never once violated. By 7, he had walked her to the corner of Forsyth and Clement and watched her disappear into the morning. He was good at his work. This was not a point of vanity. It was simply what he knew. He had trained as a mechanical engineer, had spent 7 years at a firm that did industrial systems design before the thing with Whitfield Industries happened, and he carried the habit of precision everywhere. When the boilers in a building misbehaved, he found the actual cause rather than the proximate one. When an HVAC system ran 12% over its load tolerance, he said so in writing. It was not a quality that made him popular, but it was the quality that made him reliable, and reliable was what he had to be. After Maeve went to sleep, he worked at the kitchen table. He had a small side contract with a residential firm that used him for second opinions on mechanical system designs. The work kept his mind from going flat and paid enough that Maeve's school camp registrations were not a calculation. He did not spend much time thinking about what his life would have looked like otherwise. There was a version of himself, 10 years younger, who had expected things to unfold differently. He had been an engineer with a future and a wife with a laugh that made the room feel larger, and a baby on the way, and all the uncomplicated forward motion of someone who had not yet understood what could be taken. In his desk drawer, he kept a photograph taken at the park the autumn before everything ended. Deanna was holding her stomach with both hands and squinting into the sun, laughing at something he had said. He was not in the frame, he had taken it. On the back was a date in his own handwriting, September 14th. He did not take it out often. He had never moved it. Jolene Whitfield had understood from early in her life that being Clifford Whitfield's daughter was a specific condition. It opened rooms. It also closed them, in subtler ways, from the inside. She had spent her 20s trying to establish herself on the outside of her father's name. A graduate degree in facilities management, 3 years at a commercial real estate firm in Cincinnati, where she had moved precisely because it was far enough from Indianapolis that she could see what she was capable of, without the family weight visible from every angle. She had returned 2 years ago to run the capital development division of Whitfield Industries. Her father had wanted her back from the start. She had needed to know who she was first. She was not naive about the mechanics of power. She had watched her father operate her entire life. The efficiency of it, the clarity, the absolute absence of wasted motion in how he made decisions. She had admired those qualities, and she had also quietly felt the cold edge of them when they were turned on something she cared about. She had ended an engagement 3 years earlier to a man her father had approved of, with unusual speed, which should have told her something. The relationship had ended when she realized she had been invisible in it. She had packed a box, returned a key, and moved forward. She had met Owen Strickland on a site visit to the Brennan Road facility, the company's largest distribution center, when a ventilation system malfunction had delayed their certificate of occupancy by 11 days. He had been brought in by the general contractor as a specialist. She had watched him spend 40 minutes tracing a pressure differential issue that 2 other contractors had failed to locate in 3 days. He found it, corrected it, and wrote a 1-page report explaining both the cause and the systemic condition that had allowed it to develop, noting that a quarterly inspection protocol would prevent recurrence. He had not introduced himself before beginning the work. He had introduced himself after, briefly, while packing his tools. She had asked a technical question. He had answered it without simplifying it for her, which she had noticed. She started requesting him specifically after that. Not for personal reasons, at least not at first. For the same reason you request any tool that works, because the alternative is accepting something that does not. The attention she paid to him built the way attention builds when you are trying not to name what you are doing. She learned that he had a daughter in 3rd grade. She learned this because he had taken a call outside the equipment room one afternoon. And she had heard him say very patiently that he would be there in time for the science fair, that he would not forget the poster board, that yes, the fish had been fed. She had pretended not to have heard it. She had remembered it. Clifford Whitfield had asked about Owen twice, both times with the methodical precision of someone filing information for later. Jolene had read it as approval. She had told herself that her father, whatever his other qualities, recognized competence when he saw it, and so she had gone to the facility on that Tuesday afternoon with the simple intention of extending an invitation. Her father would like to meet him. As someone she had come to trust, she had thought it was a good thing, the kind of conversation that opened the next door. Owen's answer had closed the door on everything she thought she understood. She spent that evening with her laptop open to the wrong window, reading nothing. At 10 o'clock, she called Ruth Callahan, who had been her father's operations director for 12 years before her retirement, and who had the particular quality of honesty that comes from no longer having anything to protect. Ruth picked up on the 3rd ring. She remembered the situation Jolene described. She remembered it without prompting, which told Jolene something. She remembered the facility, the subcontractor dispute, the engineer who had raised concerns about the compressor housing specifications during the Harmon Street build, concerns that had gone up the chain and come back down as an obstacle rather than a question. She remembered the meeting. She had not been in it, she said, but she had been outside the room. Ruth spoke carefully, the way people speak about things they have thought about more than they expected to. Then she said she was glad someone was asking. Jolene did not sleep well. In the morning she called her father's former HR director, now at a firm in Columbus, and asked about the Harmon Street project period. The woman was professional and precise, and said that she would need to pull archived records, but that if Jolene wanted to file a formal inquiry, Through the company's legal channel, the documentation should be available. Jolene said she would handle it herself. It took her 2 days and 4 phone calls to piece together what she needed. She sat at her kitchen table until past midnight, with the pages in front of her. A termination processed in the engineering subcontractor review period. No severance paid. Contract ended for cause listed as performance variance, which was the phrase the company used when they needed language that would not invite review. She found the formal objection Owen had submitted, still in the file, unaddressed. She also found his wife's name in the benefits cessation notice. Deanna Strickland. The coverage had ended with the contract. The date was in March. Jolene sat with that for a long time. What she felt was not clean. It was layered in the way of things that involve both love and responsibility. She was ashamed of her family's institution in the specific way that is different from personal shame. More complicated, more resistant to resolution, because it is not yours alone to resolve. She was afraid, in a way she could not entirely name, of what Owen must have felt every time she appeared in a doorway, every time she asked a question, every time she had walked toward him without knowing what she was carrying. She did not look away from any of it. She made herself look directly at each page before turning to the next. She found her father the following morning in the breakfast room before his first call. Clifford Whitfield, at 64, was a man who projected authority the way a well-maintained building projects stability, through visible structure, through the sense that every element was where it was supposed to be. He looked up from his coffee and knew from her face that this was not a social visit. She put the papers on the table in front of him and asked whether he remembered a mechanical engineer who had been contracted during the Harmon Street build, a man named Owen Strickland. Clifford looked at the papers without touching them. He said that he had overseen hundreds of contractor relationships over the years and could not be expected to recall every individual engagement. Jolene described what she had found: the technical dispute, the formal objection that had been closed without response, the termination, the timing, the benefits cut. She watched her father's face as she spoke. It moved through expressions she did not have names for. Not quite guilt, not quite distance, something in between. He said, eventually, that subcontractor disputes during that period had involved complex schedule pressures and that decisions had been made at multiple levels. He said the company had followed its protocol. His wife died, Jolene said. That spring, their baby before that. He had no income, no health coverage, and a wife who needed ongoing care. That sequence started because someone told him a building schedule was more important than him being where he needed to be. Clifford was quiet. He's been working maintenance contracts for 10 years, Jolene said. He's raising a daughter alone. And his formal engineering objection is still sitting in a file where nobody ever answered it. She stopped, then. I'm not telling you this to punish you. I'm telling you because I have been in and out of his workplace for 4 months, and I didn't know any of it, and now I do, and I can't unknow it. Her father picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. He said, "You love him." It was not a question. It was the voice of a man doing the calculation. Jolene didn't answer right away. She felt something move behind her eyes. "I think he's one of the most honest people I've ever watched work," she said. "And I think what happened to him was wrong. Both of those things are true at the same time." Her father looked at her for a moment longer than she expected. Then he looked at the papers. She left without waiting to hear what he would say next. Maeve had been sensing something for several days without being able to say what it was. Her father had cooked dinner every night, had helped her with her book report, had done everything the same, but there was a quality to his quiet that was different from his usual quiet, denser, pointed at something she couldn't see. On Thursday evening, she came and sat beside him on the couch while he was reading. She pulled her feet up underneath her and said, without introduction, "Did something happen with the building, lady?" Owen set his book down. "She made you laugh," Maeve said. "In the parking lot that one time. I saw you from the car. You didn't know I was looking. He did not say anything for a moment. "I thought about it after," she said, "because I hadn't heard you laugh like that in a while, like it surprised you." Owen put his arm around her and she tucked herself against his side the way she had since she was small enough to fit in the crook of his arm entirely. He sat there for a while with his book closed on his knee. "These things take time to figure out," he said. "I know," Maeve said. "That's what you say about the boiler in the Clement Street building." She paused. "But you figured that out eventually." He laughed once, quiet and real, in a way he had not expected to. She looked pleased with herself and said nothing more. That night after she was asleep, he called his brother Dennis in Pittsburgh, who had the particular quality of asking the right question and then waiting long enough for you to actually find the answer. Owen told him about Jolene. He told him about Clifford Whitfield. He told him all of it in sequence, which he had not done aloud before. Dennis listened. When Owen finished, Dennis said, "What are you actually afraid of?" Owen thought about it honestly. "That Maeve gets attached to something, and then it doesn't hold," he said. "That I let her build something real with someone, and then that person is gone, and she absorbs it quietly so I don't worry and I don't find out until it's already in her." He paused. "She lost her mother at 4. She doesn't talk about it much. That's not the same as it not being there." Dennis said, "You know you can't protect her from every loss by keeping everything at a distance." Owen said he knew. "She already told you she noticed," Dennis said. "She told you on purpose." Owen sat at the kitchen table after the call. The apartment was quiet in the way. Apartments are quiet when a child is asleep and everything is at rest. He took the photograph out of his desk drawer and looked at it for the first time in several months. Deanna at the park, laughing, both hands on her stomach. He had taken the picture because he had wanted to remember her like that, not arranged, not composed, just laughing at something he had said. He put it back. He sat with the drawer still open for a moment. Then he closed it and went to bed. Clifford Whitfield did not call ahead. He arrived at the Brennan Road facility on a Monday morning, spoke to the front desk, and asked to be directed to the maintenance office. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Owen charged in a month. He looked, Owen thought, when he appeared in the doorway of the equipment room, like a man who had come somewhere without being entirely certain what he intended to say once he arrived. Owen recognized him immediately. You recognize people you have thought about with precision for a long time. Not with shock, but with a settling, the way a measurement confirms a calculation you already suspected. He did not offer a seat. He did not reach for formality. He looked at Clifford and said, "All right." Clifford said he had come because he wanted to hear it directly, not from a file, not from his daughter, from Owen, so Owen told it. Plainly, the way you tell a thing you have rehearsed not as a performance but as a fact, so many times in your own head that the emotion has compressed into something denser than feeling. He described the Harmon Street project, the specification dispute, the formal objection he had submitted twice in writing, the meeting where he had been told the project schedule was not subject to revision by someone whose schedule was never on the line. He described leaving for the hospital. He described the termination that followed, the benefits cut, the weeks that came after. He did not embellish. He did not reach for effect. He gave it the way a mechanical engineer gives a diagnostic report, clean, sequential, without editorial. Clifford listened without interrupting. His face moved through things that were not quite emotions, but were close to their undersides. "The thing I've never been able to put down," Owen said, near the end, "isn't the job. It's not even the money. It's that on the day I most needed to be in one place, I was told by someone who had nothing at risk that my reasons didn't qualify. That asymmetry is what I've carried. Not rage. I'm too tired for rage. Just a very clear, lasting understanding of how much I cost to the people who had hired me." Clifford looked at the corkboard above Owen's desk. There was a drawing Maeve had made pinned to it, a dog they did not own, rendered in crayon with the legs at improbable angles, signed Edme EV in enormous letters. "Your daughter did that?" he asked. "She's 9, Owen said. She's decided the dog is named Professor. He told Clifford about Maeve the way you tell someone about the central fact of your life. Not for sympathy, but because it was relevant. Any accounting of who he was now included her. She was the reason the apartment was on Forsyth Street, and not somewhere cheaper. She was the reason he had turned down 2 higher-paying contracts that would have required travel. She was the reason he was still standing. Clifford looked at the drawing for a moment longer. Then he said, "If I told you I was sorry, what would that mean to you?" Owen considered it. "An apology tells me you've arrived at regret," he said. "It doesn't revise anything. It doesn't give Deanna back her spring. It doesn't give Maeve a memory she doesn't have. An apology is what's available when nothing else is." He was not unkind when he said it. He was simply precise. Clifford was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't come here to offer you one. I came because I needed to stand in the actual room, not the version of it I had constructed from behind a desk." He looked at Owen directly. "I understand now that what was taken from you was not recoverable, and that I have no standing to define the weight of that for you." He picked up his coat from the chair where he had laid it and left through the door he had come in. The room was very quiet. Owen stood at his workbench and looked at Maeve's crayon dog for a while. Professor stared back from the corkboard with the cheerful obliviousness of an animal that had no idea it didn't exist. Jolene did not wait to be led. She had made that decision on the drive home from her father's house, in the specific clarity that follows a conversation that goes all the way to the bottom of something. She was not the kind of person who managed a situation by standing at its edge. It was not who she was, and she was fairly certain it was not what Owen needed her to be. She went to the company's legal division and requested a full review of subcontractor terminations from the Harmon Street project period. She sat in those meetings herself. She was looking, she told them, for cases where contracts had been ended under conditions that did not reflect the company's own stated standards. In particular, cases where professional objections had been submitted and not formally addressed. There were 3 such cases. Owen's was the most significant. She brought a proposal to the board. A remediation fund for affected former contractors, paired with a formal amendment to the company's institutional record, acknowledging that the practices of that period had not met the standards the company now held itself to. The board pushed back. She had expected that. She held the line through 2 sessions and 2 revisions, and on the 3rd pass it was approved. She was not under any illusion about what this did or did not undo. You cannot repay a spring that was lost. You cannot give someone back the version of their life that was redirected without their consent. She did not pretend that an institutional record amendment was the same thing as repair. But it was the difference between a company that acknowledged what it had done and one that simply waited for the people it had wronged to stop being visible. When it was done, she drove to the Brennan Road facility on a Friday afternoon and asked for Owen at the front desk. He came down in his work clothes, a little guarded in the careful way he had always been guarded with her, which she now understood differently than she had before. She told him what she had done. She did not present it as something that would change anything between them. She said she had done it because it was overdue and because she could not go on. Overseeing the construction of new things on a foundation that included that kind of unacknowledged damage without it meaning something about her. He listened without speaking. "I'm not asking you to feel differently about my father," she said. "I'm not asking you to feel differently about any of it. I know what I can't give back." She looked at him. "I just needed you to know that I looked at it directly, the whole thing, and I didn't look away." Something shifted in his face. Not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories that are tidied at the edges. It was quieter than that. The particular change that happens when something that has been braced discovers the thing it was bracing against has moved, he said. "I know you mean that." "I do," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, for the first time she could remember, he was the one who did not look away first. 3 weeks passed. The days between them had a different texture. not resolved exactly, but breathable. The distance had not closed entirely. It was a space they both moved through with care, with the mutual attentiveness of people who understood that what was fragile between them was worth being careful with. Maeve had been told that Jolene was someone her dad trusted, and that they were still finding out what kind of friends they were going to be, and that sometimes that took time. Maeve had accepted this with the studied patience of a child who has observed that adults frequently take longer than necessary to arrive at obvious conclusions. Clifford, in the weeks since his visit to Brennan Road, had changed in ways that were small but not nothing. He had stopped coming to the office at the hours designed to be seen. He had started having dinner with Jolene on Tuesday evenings and asking about her work in ways that were actually about her work. He had not mentioned Owen's name again directly. He had also, without telling Jolene until after it was done, contacted the licensing board that had held Owen's professional engineering certification in a suspended status following the contract dispute, a status that had never been formally cleared, which Owen had not been in a financial position to contest at the time. Clifford had retained a firm to handle the reinstatement review at his own expense. He had sent the documentation to Owen's address, with a cover letter that was 2 sentences long. It said only that a wrong had been done and that this was one part of it he could actually do something about. He asked for nothing in return. Owen called Jolene when the envelope arrived. His voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, not quite relief, not quite softness. Something between the two that she did not have a word for yet. On a Saturday in late October, Jolene took Maeve to the Science Museum on the north side of the city, the one with the engineering exhibit that Maeve had asked about 3 times in the past month. They spent an hour and a half on the bridge building station before Maeve was satisfied that her design could hold the test weights. Jolene had been drafted as the structural consultant. She had accepted this role seriously, as Maeve clearly required. Owen arrived midway through the afternoon. He had come from a half-day job, still in his jacket, and he crossed the atrium with the particular quality of motion he had. Unhurried but very deliberate, like a man who had thought through exactly where he was going and was no longer apologizing for it. Maeve spotted him from the mezzanine and waved with the large, committed gestures of someone flagging down a ship. He raised a hand back and smiled, and Jolene watched the smile reach his face the way something reaches a face when it is not performed. He came and stood beside her on the mezzanine, while Maeve returned to the exhibit below, having apparently decided that the bridge required additional reinforcement. "She told me you were a good consultant," he said. "I had opinions about load distribution," Jolene said. "She overruled me twice." "She does that," he said. They stood there watching Maeve explain something with great authority to another child who had wandered over to observe the bridge. The afternoon light came through the atrium windows in long-angled panels. "The certification came through," Owen said. "Thursday, I know," Jolene said. "He told me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to do anything with it yet," she said. "No." He was quiet again. Below them, Maeve had accepted the other child as an assistant and was pointing at a support beam. "But I've been thinking," he said, "about what it would mean to work as an engineer again. Whether I still could." He paused. "Whether that version of me is still in there." "It's in there," Jolene said. She said it plainly, the way you say something you are simply sure of. He looked at her. "You can't know that. I watched you spend 40 minutes finding a pressure differential issue that 2 other people walked past," she said. "I know it." He didn't say anything to that. After a moment he reached over and took her hand where it rested on the railing. He didn't make a production of it. He simply placed his hand around hers and held it there, in the ordinary afternoon light of a public place, with his daughter below them explaining engineering to a stranger. From the exhibit floor, Maeve glanced up. She looked back down immediately and resumed her explanation to her assistant, but Jolene had seen the corner of her mouth lift before she turned away. With Maeve, the smile always got there before she could stop it. Clifford came to the museum that afternoon. He had not been invited. He had found out from Jolene's calendar, which was the kind of thing he could still do and which he recognized he should probably stop doing. He parked on the street and stood outside for a while before going in. He found them on the mezzanine. He did not approach. He stood at the far end of the atrium near the water feature, far enough that he was not an intrusion, and watched. Owen and Jolene stood at the railing with their hands together in the straightforward way of people who are not making a statement about it, just doing a thing they have decided to do. Below them, Maeve directed her engineering team with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her own assessment. Clifford stood there for several minutes. He was not a man who examined himself often, and he was not doing it now exactly, more registering than examining. He was registering the specific dimensions of what a decision made in a conference room could reach, what it could subtract from a life that had been moving in one direction and then was required to move in another, what it looked like 10 years later in an atrium on a Saturday afternoon, with the sun coming through the windows at an angle that made everything look slightly more real than usual. Owen saw him. Clifford watched Owen find him across the room the way a precise person locates something, without drama, simply by looking. They held that for a moment. Then Owen, still holding Jolene's hand, gave one small nod. Not welcome, not forgiveness. Something narrower and more honest than either. A recognition that the other man had come and stood where he was not owed anything, and had done the one thing still available to him. That it was not nothing. That from somewhere like here, there might eventually be somewhere further. Clifford nodded back. Then he turned and walked out the way he had come in. There are things that cannot be undone. This is not a comfortable fact, but it is a structural one, the kind that holds whether you acknowledge it or not. A certification reinstated cannot give back the years it was absent. A fund established cannot return the person whose absence it memorializes. A nod across an atrium does not close a decade. These things remain true. Remaining true is what they do. But there are also people who have been carrying something for so long that the weight has become the whole of what they know about themselves, who have been so certain the floor would not hold that they have stopped testing it. And there are moments, not resolutions, not endings with ribbons on them, but honest, imperfect, forward-moving moments, when the carrying pauses, when the weight is still there, in a photograph in a desk drawer, in a name on a licensing document, in the particular shape of a loss that does not stop being a loss just because time has moved through it, but it is no longer the only thing defining the road ahead. Owen Strickland, on a Saturday in October, in the ordinary afternoon light of a science museum atrium, with his daughter below him running a bridge-building operation, with considerable authority, and the woman beside him holding his hand without ceremony and without condition, understood that the floor was still there, that it had been there, that the future, which he had not trusted with very much for a very long time, was not going to stop arriving just because he had not been ready for it. Maeve called up from below that the bridge needed one more person to test it, and could they please come down. Owen let go of Jolene's hand to wave in acknowledgement, and then reached back for it as they turned toward the stairs, and she gave it to him, and they went down together to where his daughter was waiting, and the afternoon kept going the way afternoons do when the people in them have decided, without announcing it, to stay.